On a cold winter morning, a hungry girl timidly walked into the reception of a large company. The businessman, known for his coldness, decided to offer her a full meal without asking questions. Years later, amid the company's collapse, she returned, now as the brilliant mind capable of saving it. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. It was one of those bitter winter mornings in Chicago when the wind cut through clothing like steel, and the city seemed grayer and more silent than usual. Snow fell in heavy flakes, and the towering skyscrapers disappeared into the thick fog. The clock had barely struck 7 when a small, trembling figure, poorly dressed for the harsh weather, appeared in the reception area of Mitchell Enterprises, one of the most renowned companies in the Midwest, built through decades of hard work by Robert Mitchell, a demanding and pragmatic businessman known for his coldness in business dealings, but also for his sharp instinct in detecting potential and... Robert had arrived early that day, as he did most days. At 52, he maintained the same disciplined routine that had helped him build his financial consulting empire from nothing. The son of a factory worker, he'd climbed his way up through sheer determination, tactical intelligence, and an unwavering focus on results. His corner office on the 47th floor overlooked the Chicago River, a daily reminder of how far he'd come. "Mr. Mitchell, your 8:30 with the Westbrook team is confirmed, and the quarterly reports are on your desk," said Diane, his executive assistant, of 15 years, as she handed him a steaming cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, exactly as he'd taken it for the past 20 years. "Thank you, Diane. Any word from the Shanghai office about the merger documents?" Robert asked, not looking up from his phone as he scrolled through overnight emails. "They promised delivery by noon our time. I'll follow up again in an hour," she replied efficiently. Robert nodded and was about to head to his office when a commotion at the security desk caught his attention. It wasn't the usual type of disturbance, not an angry client or a persistent salesperson, but something altogether different. A security guard was speaking in hushed tones to a small figure, bundled in what appeared to be several layers of mismatched clothing. "I'm sorry, young lady, but this is a private building. I can't just let you wander around," the guard was saying, his tone a mixture of firmness and unexpected gentleness. What presented itself before the security desk that morning wasn't a business proposal or an investment opportunity, but a girl who couldn't have been more than 12, visibly hungry, with wide eyes reflecting a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and a strange dignity. She hadn't asked for a job or money. She had simply walked in, timid, asking if she might get something to eat. Robert normally would have continued walking, leaving security to handle the situation. Homelessness was a persistent problem in Chicago, especially during the brutal winters, and while he donated generously to several shelters, he kept such matters at arm's length. Personal involvement wasn't his style, yet something made him pause. Perhaps it was the girl's expression, somewhere between resistance and exhaustion, or perhaps it was something in her eyes that reminded him of himself as a boy, before ambition had hardened him into the man he'd become. "Is there a problem here, Carl?" Robert approached the security desk, surprising both the guard and himself. "Mr. Mitchell, sir." Carl straightened immediately. "No problem. Just explaining to this young lady that this isn't a public building." The girl looked up at Robert, and he was struck by the clarity in her eyes, despite her disheveled appearance. Her dark hair was tucked under a faded blue beanie, and her hands, reddened from the cold, clutched the edges of her oversized coat. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft but surprisingly steady. "I'll go. I didn't mean to cause trouble." Robert wasn't a man given to charitable impulses, but in that instant, something touched him, something he couldn't explain and wouldn't have admitted to anyone. Instead of dismissing her, he found himself speaking words that surprised even him. "When was the last time you ate, young lady?" She hesitated, pride briefly flashing across her features before honesty won out. "Yesterday morning." Robert checked his watch. His 8:30 meeting was important, a potential client worth millions. But he found himself making a decision that defied his usual pragmatism. "Carl, please call up to the executive dining room and tell them I'm bringing a guest for breakfast." The security guard's eyebrows shot up, but he knew better than to question Mitchell. "Yes, sir, right away." "Come with me," Robert said to the girl, not unkindly but not warmly either. It was simply a statement, an instruction like the countless others he gave throughout his day. The girl hesitated, understandably wary. "Why are you helping me?" It was a good question, one Robert himself couldn't fully answer. "Because it's cold outside and no one should go hungry if I can help it," he said finally, surprising himself with the words. The executive dining room on the 46th floor was empty at that hour, just as Robert had expected. He instructed the chef to prepare a full breakfast, not just toast or cereal, but eggs, bacon, pancakes, fruit, and hot chocolate. The kind of meal his own children, now grown and living on opposite coasts, used to enjoy on Sunday mornings before family life, had given way to business demands. The girl ate in silence, her movements measured despite her hunger. She didn't wolf down the food as Robert had expected, but ate with a certain deliberate dignity that struck him as unusual for someone so young and clearly in need. "What's your name?" he asked as she finished her pancakes. "Sophia," she replied. After a moment's hesitation, "Sophia Carter." "Where are your parents, Sophia?" Her expression closed slightly. "My mum works 2 jobs. We lost our apartment last month. She's trying to find us a place, but it's hard in winter." Robert nodded, not pressing further. He wasn't a social worker after all. This was a momentary deviation from his routine, not a new calling. "Do you go to school?" he asked. A flash of something, pride perhaps, crossed her face. "Yes, I haven't missed a day, even when—" She trailed off, not completing the thought, but Robert understood. Even when they had nowhere to live. Even when she was hungry. When she finished eating, Robert called down to have a car ready. "Where can my driver take you? School? A relative's house?" "The public library on State Street," she said. "I go there after breakfast until school starts. They don't mind if I sit and read." Robert nodded, writing something on a business card, before handing it to her. "If you need help again, call this number. It's my direct line." Sophia looked at the card, then back at Robert, studying him with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable, as if she were memorizing his features for some future reference. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell," she said finally, tucking the card carefully into her coat pocket. "Not just for the food, but for treating me like a person." The simple statement caught Robert off guard. Before he could respond, she had turned and followed the security guard who would escort her to the waiting car. Robert returned to his office, his brief detour into charity already fading as he prepared for his 8:30 meeting. By noon, the encounter had receded to the back of his mind, displaced by contracts, negotiations, and the familiar rhythm of business. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Sophia had left something behind. Not in the dining room or the lobby, but with Diane at the reception desk. A small note, hastily written on the back of a library checkout slip, handed discreetly to the assistant as Sophia passed through the lobby. The note, which Diane placed in her drawer, intending to give to her boss later but eventually forgetting, contained just 7 words. "Thank you, someday I'll come back to help." The following week saw Mitchell Enterprises secure the Westbrook deal, adding another prestigious client to their portfolio. Robert barely thought about the hungry girl he'd fed breakfast to, except for fleeting moments when he passed the executive dining room or caught glimpses of children bundled against the Chicago winter. These moments of remembrance grew increasingly rare as the months passed, becoming little more than an unusual anecdote in the otherwise methodical narrative of his life. Spring came, then summer, and by the time the leaves turned golden again, the memory of Sophia Carter had faded almost completely from Robert's mind, replaced by quarterly projections, international expansions, and the relentless pursuit of growth that had defined his career for nearly 3 decades. Mitchell Enterprises occupied 20 floors of one of Chicago's most prestigious downtown buildings. From humble beginnings as a one-man financial advisory service, Robert had built a conglomerate that now specialized in corporate restructuring, mergers, and acquisitions, and innovative financial solutions for companies in crisis. His specialty was saving failing businesses, streamlining their operations, and turning them profitable again, often at the cost of significant workforce reductions and radical restructuring. The Mitchell method, as it had come to be known in business circles, was both feared and respected. It was brutally efficient, undeniably effective, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. "Business isn't personal," was one of Robert's favorite maxims, repeated so often that it had been unofficially adopted as the company motto. His executive team was comprised of people cut from the same cloth, sharp, analytical minds who valued efficiency over emotion and results over relationships. Among them was James Harrington, Robert's protégé and heir apparent, a 38-year-old Harvard Business School graduate with a reputation for being even more ruthless than his mentor. "The Anderson Group numbers are in," James announced, striding into Robert's office one afternoon without knocking, a privilege afforded to him alone. "We underestimated the potential. Their assets are undervalued by at least 30%. If we move quickly, we can acquire them at a fraction of their actual worth before the market realizes what's happening." Robert nodded, scanning the report James had tossed onto his desk. "Their leadership is weak. The CEO is too emotionally attached to the company his grandfather built. He'll resist selling until it's too late, and by then we'll set the terms." He looked up at his protégé. "Make the preparations. We'll approach them next quarter when their Q2 results spook their shareholders." James smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "Already done. I've had the team working on the proposal for 3 weeks." This was why Robert valued James. He anticipated, he executed, he delivered. No excuses, no hesitation, no unnecessary moral deliberations, just results. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Robert's office, Chicago sprawled in all its architectural glory. From this height, the people on the streets were merely dots, the traffic a distant hum. Robert preferred it this way, observing from above, making decisions that affected thousands without having to see the individual impact. It was cleaner that way, more efficient. His personal life reflected the same detached efficiency. Divorced. For 11 years from Margaret, who now lived in San Francisco, Robert maintained cordial but distant relationships with his 2 adult children. Thomas, 28, worked for a tech startup in Seattle, while Elizabeth, 26, was a resident physician in Boston. They exchanged obligatory phone calls on birthdays and major holidays, but rarely discussed anything beyond surface pleasantries. Robert told himself this was normal. They were adults with their own lives, but in his rare moments of honest introspection, he recognized that the emotional distance had begun long before they'd left home. The Mitchell Mansion in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood was an impressive 19th-century limestone structure, meticulously restored and modernized. It was also largely empty, inhabited only by Robert and a small staff who maintained the property with the same precision that characterized everything in his life. He rarely entertained there, preferring the neutral territory of upscale restaurants, for the few social obligations he couldn't avoid. That evening, as Robert sat alone in his study, a glass of 25-year-old Macallan in his hand, he found himself staring at a framed photograph on his desk, the only personal item in the otherwise austere room. It showed a much younger version of himself with Margaret and the children during a rare vacation to Yellowstone National Park. Thomas couldn't have been more than 10, Elizabeth around 8. They were all smiling, genuinely happy in a way that seemed foreign to him now. For a brief moment he wondered what had happened to that man in the photograph, when exactly the ambitious but still idealistic young father had transformed into the cold, calculating figure he now saw reflected in the window glass. The thought was uncomfortable, and he dismissed it quickly, turning instead to the quarterly reports awaiting his review. The years rolled forward with the predictable rhythm that Robert preferred. Mitchell Enterprises continued to grow, acquiring competitors, expanding internationally, and solidifying its reputation as one of the most formidable financial consulting firms in the country. By 2015, they had offices in 12 countries and a client list that included Fortune 500 companies, international conglomerates, and even several government agencies. Yet beneath the gleaming surface of success, subtle cracks were beginning to form. The first signs were easy to dismiss. A key client choosing a younger, more innovative competitor, a talented team of analysts leaving to start their own firm, regulatory changes that made some of their most profitable strategies less viable. None of these developments seemed particularly alarming in isolation, but together they formed a pattern that would have been concerning to anyone paying close attention. Robert, however, was distracted by what he considered bigger opportunities. China's market was opening in unprecedented ways, and he was determined to establish Mitchell Enterprises as a dominant player there before their competitors could gain a foothold. The initiative consumed resources, attention, and energy that might otherwise have been directed toward addressing the early warning signs at home. James Harrington, meanwhile, had begun to show ambitions that extended beyond serving as Robert's right hand. He cultivated his own relationships with key clients, built a loyal faction within the executive team, and subtly positioned himself not as Robert's successor, but as a potential replacement should the board ever decide a change in leadership was necessary. "We need to talk about the European division," James said during their weekly meeting in early 2017. "The numbers don't add up. We're losing market share to Dexler Consulting in Germany and the UK." Robert waved a dismissive hand. "Europe is secondary right now. Asia is where our future lies. Once we've secured our position in Shanghai and Beijing, we can refocus on the European market." "With all due respect," James persisted, his tone carefully measured, "we can't afford to let our established markets deteriorate while chasing new ones. The board is starting to ask questions." A flash of irritation crossed Robert's face. "The board approved our Asia strategy unanimously. That was 18 months ago. Things have changed." James placed a folder on Robert's desk. "These are the latest projections. We're looking at a 22% decline in European revenue over the next year if we don't take corrective action now." Robert didn't open the folder. "I'll review it later. For now, maintain course. The Shanghai office opens next month, and I want all our energy focused on making that launch successful." James hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "By the way, did you see the profile of Archer Solutions in this month's Forbes? They're being hailed as the new disruptors in our industry. Might be worth keeping an eye on them." After James left, Robert did open the folder, scanning the projections with a frown. The numbers were concerning, but not yet alarming. They could weather a temporary downturn in Europe if the Asia expansion delivered as expected. Besides, he'd navigated far worse challenges in building Mitchell Enterprises. This was merely a bump in the road. As for Archer Solutions, he'd seen the article James mentioned. A young upstart firm founded by former Google executives who claimed to be reinventing corporate restructuring for the digital age. Their approach emphasized preserving jobs through innovation rather than cutting them for efficiency, leveraging technology to find savings elsewhere. Robert had dismissed it as idealistic nonsense, the kind of feel-good business philosophy that made for good press but poor profits. What he couldn't know, was that the seemingly insignificant decisions he was making now, the warning signs he was choosing to ignore, and the new competitors he was dismissing would converge in the coming years to create a perfect storm that would threaten everything he had built. And somewhere out there, the girl he had fed breakfast to all those years ago was growing up, studying, working, and preparing, unknowingly, to play a pivotal role in the future of Mitchell Enterprises. The note she had left, forgotten in Diane's drawer even after the assistant had retired in 2016, would eventually resurface at exactly the moment it needed to, bringing with it a reckoning that Robert Mitchell could never have anticipated. 10. Years had passed since that snowy morning when Sophia Carter walked into the Mitchell Enterprises building. Chicago had changed. New skyscrapers had risen, old neighborhoods had transformed, and the relentless pace of technological evolution had reshaped industries across the board. For Robert Mitchell, now 62, the decade had brought continued success, at least on the surface, but the foundation of his empire had begun to crumble in ways that were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The first major blow came when the much-hyped Asian expansion failed to deliver the expected returns. The Shanghai office, opened with great fanfare and at tremendous expense, struggled against entrenched local competitors and cultural barriers that Robert had drastically underestimated. 2 years of sustained losses forced them to downsize the operation significantly, damaging both the company's balance sheet and its reputation for infallibility. "We should have listened to the regional advisors," conceded Patricia Yang, the chief operating officer and one of the few executives willing to speak candidly to Robert. "They warned us about the regulatory challenges and the importance of local partnerships, but we thought we knew better." Robert, unaccustomed to admitting error, had simply redirected focus to other initiatives, but the Asia debacle had exposed a vulnerability that competitors and clients alike were quick to notice. For the first time in decades, Mitchell Enterprises was being described in industry publications as struggling to adapt and losing its innovative edge. Meanwhile, the key European division that James had warned about years earlier had indeed deteriorated, with key clients defecting to more digitally savvy competitors, particularly Archer Solutions, which had grown from an upstart to a serious contender in remarkably short order. "They're eating our lunch in the tech sector," James reported during a tense executive meeting in early 2022. "Their integrated digital approach is resonating with clients who find our traditional methods too rigid and outdated." "Our methods work," Robert insisted, his voice carrying the edge it always did when he felt challenged. "They've worked for 30 years. These tech companies will learn the hard way that business fundamentals don't change just because everyone's carrying a smartphone now." Uncomfortable silence followed his pronouncement. It was Patricia who finally broke it. "Robert, with respect, the fundamentals have changed. The pace of business has accelerated exponentially. Companies need restructuring solutions that can be implemented in weeks, not months. They need partners who understand digital transformation, not just cost-cutting." "Are you suggesting we abandon our core methodology?" Robert's tone was dangerous. "I'm suggesting we evolve it," Patricia replied evenly, "before it's too late." But evolution had never been Robert Mitchell's strong suit. He had built his empire on a set of principles he considered immutable, and the suggestion that they needed radical revision felt like a personal affront. Instead of adapting, he doubled down, pushing his team to pursue the same strategies more aggressively, convinced that the market would eventually recognize their superior value. It didn't. By mid-2023, Mitchell Enterprises had lost nearly 30% of its market value. 3 consecutive quarters of declining revenue triggered anxious calls from board members and shareholders. The company that had once been synonymous with financial rescue was now in need of rescue itself. "The board wants to meet Diane's successor, a young woman named Jessica," informed Robert one morning. "All of them in person. They're flying in next week." Robert knew what this meant. In his 35 years of business, he had orchestrated enough boardroom coups to recognize the signs of one being organized against him. The thought that he, Robert Mitchell, who had built this company from nothing, might be forced out was both infuriating and terrifying. For the first time in years, he found himself working late into the night, poring over reports, searching for a strategy that might reverse their fortunes quickly enough to appease the board. The Mitchell mansion, always quiet, became a virtual tomb as he withdrew further into himself, refusing dinner invitations from the few friends he had maintained and ignoring his daughter Elizabeth's increasingly concerned calls. "Dad, Thomas, and I are worried," she said in one voicemail. "We haven't heard from you in weeks. The things we're reading in the business press. Are you okay?" He didn't return the call. How could he explain to his children, whom he'd taught that strength and success were everything, that he was facing the prospect of very public failure? Better to distance himself until he had found a solution, regained control, reasserted his dominance. The board meeting, held in the same conference room where Robert had orchestrated countless corporate takeovers, was every bit as brutal as he had anticipated. "The numbers speak for themselves," said Harold Winters, the lead independent director, and a man who had once been one of Robert's closest allies. 3 consecutive quarters of declining revenue, market share losses in every major region, staff departures reaching critical levels, and, most concerning, the Anderson Group contract, our largest client for the past 15 years, is up for renewal next month, and our sources indicate they're seriously considering Archer solutions. The Anderson situation is under control, Robert asserted, projecting a confidence he didn't entirely feel. I've personally spoken with Richard Anderson, and he's assured me of his continued confidence in our services. Harold exchanged glances with the other board members. That's not what our information suggests, Robert. In fact, we've heard that James Harrington, who, as you know, left us 6 months ago to join Archer, has been meeting with their executive team weekly. The mention of James was a deliberate twist of the knife. His defection to Archer Solutions had been a personal betrayal, as much as a professional one, taking with him not only his expertise, but also his intimate knowledge of Mitchell Enterprises' strategies and vulnerabilities. What exactly are you proposing, Harold? Robert asked, his voice dangerously calm. We believe the company needs new leadership, Harold replied directly. Someone who understands the digital landscape and can modernize our approach before it's too late. You want me to step down? It wasn't a question. We want you to transition to a chairman emeritus role, Harold corrected, though the distinction was meaningless. We're prepared to bring in an interim CEO while conducting a formal search for your successor. Robert's knuckles whitened as he gripped the arms of his chair. And if I refuse? Then we'll put it to a shareholder vote at the next quarterly meeting, Harold said quietly. Given the current stock performance, I think we both know how that would go. The implied threat hung in the air. Robert had always maintained a controlling interest in the company, but recent market conditions had forced him to liquidate a significant portion of his holdings to cover personal investment losses. His voting power was no longer absolute. I built this company, Robert said, each word precise and heavy with suppressed emotion. When the rest of you were still climbing corporate ladders, I was creating something from nothing. This company exists because of me. No one disputes that, Robert, Patricia interjected gently. Your legacy is secure. But companies, like people, have life cycles. Maybe it's time for Mitchell Enterprises to enter its next phase. I'm not dead yet, Robert snapped, and neither is this company. Give me 3 months. If I haven't turned things around by then, I'll step down voluntarily. The board members exchanged glances, silently conferring. Finally, Harold nodded. 3 months, starting today, but we'll need to see concrete progress, not just promises, and we want weekly updates. Agreed, Robert said, rising from his chair to signal the end of the meeting. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to save. After they filed out, Robert remained in the conference room alone, staring out at the Chicago skyline he had once felt he owned a piece of. 3 months to save a lifetime's work. 3 months to prove that he wasn't obsolete, that the Mitchell method still had value in a world that seemed increasingly foreign to him. As he contemplated his next move, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Jessica entered, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Mitchell, but there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's very insistent. I don't have time for unexpected visitors, Robert said dismissively. Whoever it is, tell them to call my office and schedule a proper meeting. She says it's regarding the Anderson Group contract, Jessica added. She claims to have a proposal that could save it. Robert's attention sharpened immediately. The Anderson contract wasn't just their largest, it was the cornerstone upon which their reputation still rested. Losing it would accelerate their decline exponentially. What's her name? He asked. Jessica consulted her tablet. Sophia Carter. She's the founder of a boutique consulting firm called Phoenix Strategy. They specialize in digital transformation for traditional industries. The name meant nothing to Robert, another hungry young consultant looking to make her name by attaching herself to a struggling giant, no doubt. Under normal circumstances, he would have sent her away without a second thought. But normal circumstances had evaporated the moment. The board had put a 3-month countdown on his career. "Send her in," he said finally. "But make it clear she has 15 minutes, not a second more." Jessica nodded and retreated, returning moments later to usher in a visitor whose arrival would mark the beginning of a transformation that neither of them could possibly have anticipated. De force. Woman who walked into the conference room was not what Robert had expected. In his mind, he'd pictured someone like the countless ambitious consultants he'd encountered over the years, aggressive, overconfident, with the particular brand of rehearsed charisma that seemed manufactured in business schools these days. Sophia Carter was something else entirely. She moved with a quiet self-assurance that required no flashy demonstration. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant style, and she wore a tailored navy suit that spoke of quality without ostentation. But it was her eyes that caught Robert's attention, sharp, observant, and somehow familiar, though he couldn't place why. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Mitchell," she said, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm and direct. "I appreciate you making time on what I understand has been a challenging day." Robert's eyebrows rose slightly. News of the board meeting shouldn't have traveled so quickly. "You seem well informed, Miss Carter." She smiled, a small, measured expression. "In my line of work, being well informed is the minimum requirement, may I?" She gestured to the chair across from him. Robert nodded, studying her as she sat and placed a slim leather portfolio on the table. She appeared to be in her early 20s, which struck him as remarkably young to be founding any kind of consulting firm, let alone one specializing in digital transformation. Either she was exceptionally talented, or this was an elaborate bluff. He was inclined to believe the latter. 15 minutes, he reminded her, checking his watch. Pointedly. "I'll need 10, she replied with calm confidence. "You're about to lose the Anderson Group contract to Archer Solutions. They've already drafted the termination letter and planned the transition. James Harrington has convinced them that Mitchell Enterprises is no longer capable of supporting their digital evolution." Robert maintained his poker face, though inwardly he was unsettled by the precision of her information. "And you know this." "How?" "Because until 3 weeks ago I was consulting for Anderson on their digital infrastructure project," Sophia said. "I was in the room when James made his final pitch and when Richard Anderson made his decision." "If that's true, why are you here?" Robert's tone was skeptical. "Shouldn't you be celebrating with your Archer colleagues?" "I don't work for Archer," she clarified. "Phoenix Strategy was hired independently to assess Anderson's technical needs. Our contract ended when they made their vendor decision." "So, you're here out of the goodness of your heart." The sarcasm in Robert's voice was unmistakable. Sophia didn't react to his tone. Instead, she opened her portfolio and removed a document, sliding it across the table to him. "I'm here because Anderson is making a mistake, and so are you. This is a proposal for how Mitchell Enterprises could not only retain the Anderson contract, but transform it into something much more valuable for both parties." Despite his skepticism, Robert's curiosity was piqued. He picked up the document, scanning the executive summary with practiced efficiency. What he read made him pause, then return to the beginning and read more carefully. The proposal was unlike anything his team had produced, a comprehensive digital transformation strategy that preserved the core financial restructuring services Mitchell specialized in, while integrating them with cutting-edge analytics, automation, and predictive modeling. "This isn't just about keeping Anderson," he realized aloud. "This is a complete reimagining of our service model." Sophia nodded. "The Mitchell method is still valuable, but it needs to evolve. Your approach to financial restructuring is unparalleled when it comes to identifying inefficiencies and optimizing capital allocation. What's missing is the digital layer that can accelerate implementation and create continuous value beyond the initial restructuring." She leaned forward slightly, her expression intensifying. "The problem isn't that your methods don't work, Mr. Mitchell. It's that they take too long to implement in today's business environment, and they stop short of the digital transformation that modern companies need to sustain their recovered profitability." Robert looked up from the proposal, reassessing the young woman before him. Her analysis was uncomfortably accurate, precisely the issue Patricia and others had been trying to articulate for years, but which he had refused to fully acknowledge. This is an impressive theoretical framework, he conceded. But Anderson needs immediate practical solutions. They've already made their decision. They've made a preliminary decision, Sophia corrected. The official transition isn't scheduled until next month, and Richard Anderson is a pragmatist above all else. If you present him with a demonstrably superior alternative, he'll listen. She reached into her portfolio again and extracted a flash drive, placing it beside the proposal. This contains a functioning prototype of the integrated analytics platform, described in the proposal, pre-populated with Anderson's publicly available financial data from the past 5 years. It demonstrates how your restructuring methodology, when combined with our digital tools, can identify optimization opportunities that neither approach could discover independently. Robert stared at the flash drive, then back at Sophia. You developed a customized prototype on spec, with no guarantee that either Anderson or Mitchell would even see it. I believe in being prepared, she replied simply, and I believe that the right solution, properly presented, creates its own opportunity. For fee. The first time in the conversation, Robert felt a genuine spark of interest, not just in the proposal itself, which was undeniably innovative, but in this enigmatic young woman who had appeared out of nowhere with exactly what he needed at precisely the moment he needed it. Let's say I'm intrigued, he said carefully. What exactly are you proposing in terms of our working relationship, a partnership between Mitchell Enterprises and Phoenix Strategy? Sophia shook her head. Not exactly. I'm proposing to join Mitchell Enterprises as Chief Innovation Officer, with a mandate to integrate these digital capabilities throughout your service offerings, starting with the Anderson relationship as a proof of concept. Robert leaned back, surprised by her directness. That's an ambitious ask for someone I've just met, regardless of how impressive your proposal might be. You have 3 months to convince your board that Mitchell Enterprises can adapt to the digital era, Sophia stated matter-of-factly. I'm offering you a way to do that while simultaneously saving your most important client relationship. Another jolt of surprise. She even knew about the board's ultimatum. Robert found himself simultaneously impressed by her intelligence network and unsettled by it. You seem remarkably well informed about my company's internal affairs, Miss Carter. Information is currency in our business, Mr. Mitchell. You taught me that, in a way. Before Robert could ask what she meant by that cryptic statement, his phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Richard Anderson on line 1 says it's urgent. The timing was almost too perfect to be coincidental. Robert glanced at Sophia, who maintained her composed expression, betraying nothing. Excuse me a moment, he said, picking up the conference room phone. Richard, good to hear from you. The key. Conversation that followed was brief and direct. Richard Anderson, without explicitly stating that he was terminating their contract, made it clear that he had serious concerns about Mitchell Enterprises' capacity to support Anderson Group's evolving needs. He suggested they meet the following day to discuss the future of our relationship. After hanging up, Robert looked at Sophia with new intensity. Did you know he was going to call? I knew he was meeting with his executive team this morning to finalize their vendor decision, she replied. The timing of his call is fortuitous but not orchestrated, if that's what you're asking. Robert studied her for a long moment, weighing his options. His instincts, honed through decades of high-stakes business decisions, were sending mixed signals. On one hand, this woman and her proposal represented an unknown quantity, a risk at a time when he could ill afford additional uncertainty. On the other hand, the alternative was almost certainly losing Anderson and, with it, any realistic chance of satisfying the board's demands. If I take this proposal to Anderson tomorrow, he said finally, what guarantees do I have that it will change his mind? None, Sophia answered with refreshing honesty. But consider the alternative. Without a radical new approach, you'll definitely lose Anderson. With this, you at least have a fighting chance. Her directness was compelling, After a moment's further consideration, Robert made his decision. "I'll present your proposal to Anderson tomorrow," he said. "If he responds positively, we can discuss your role at Mitchell Enterprises, but I'll need you to walk me through every detail of this platform tonight so I can speak to it credibly." "I can do better than that," Sophia replied, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "I'll come with you to the meeting." Robert's eyebrows shot up. "That's not how I operate, Ms. Carter. I meet with clients personally. With respect, Mr. Mitchell, this isn't just a financial restructuring discussion. It's a technical presentation of a digital platform that you're not yet familiar with. Anderson will have his CTO and digital team present. You need someone who can address their technical questions directly." The logic was impeccable, but it still ran counter to Robert's established practices. He'd always been the one to close major deals, to sit across from CEOs and speak the language of executive decision-making. Bringing in an unknown quantity, especially someone as young as Sophia, seemed risky. Yet as he considered the proposal again, he recognized that he was in uncharted territory. The old rules, his rules, hadn't been working. Perhaps it was time for a new approach. "Very well," he conceded. "We'll meet with Anderson together, but I lead the discussion on strategy and business outcomes. You handle the technical aspects, only when directly addressed." "Agreed," Sophia said, extending her hand again to seal the arrangement. As they shook hands, Robert was struck again by the strange sense of familiarity. "Have we met before today, Miss Carter?" Something flickered. In her eyes, a moment of hesitation, perhaps, or consideration. Then she simply said, "Everyone in financial consulting knows Robert Mitchell, sir. Your reputation precedes you." It wasn't quite an answer to his question, but Robert let it pass. He had more pressing concerns than a vague sense of déjà vu. "Be here at 7 a.m. tomorrow. We'll review the presentation once more before meeting Anderson at 9. As Sophia gathered her materials to leave, Robert found himself watching her with an intensity that surprised even him. There was something about her, a quality he couldn't quite define, that suggested depths beyond her polished professional exterior. Whatever it was, he had the distinct impression that Sophia Carter was not simply another ambitious young consultant, but someone who might improbably hold the key to saving everything he had built. What he couldn't possibly know was just how right that impression would prove to be, or how deeply intertwined their paths had already been. The Anderson meeting exceeded even Robert's cautious expectations. Richard Anderson, initially skeptical and barely concealing his intention to end their long-standing relationship, had transformed over the course of the 2-hour presentation. By the end, he was leaning forward in his chair, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and integration possibilities. The transformation was due largely to Sophia's portion of the presentation. She had navigated the technical demonstration with impressive clarity, translating complex digital concepts into business value propositions that resonated with both Anderson and his leadership team. When the CTO had raised pointed questions about data security and API integration, clearly attempting to find flaws, Sophia had responded with such authoritative precision that the man had eventually nodded in grudging respect. "This is not what I expected from Mitchell Enterprises," Anderson had admitted as the meeting concluded. "It's a fundamentally different approach than what James presented from Archer." "Different how?" Robert had asked, sensing victory within reach. "Archer's proposal was essentially to replace your financial restructuring methodology with their digital-first approach," Anderson explained. "What you're proposing is an integration that preserves the proven elements of the Mitchell method while accelerating and enhancing them through digital tools. It's the best of both worlds, assuming you can deliver it as demonstrated." "We can," Robert had assured him, with a confidence born partly from desperation and partly from the surprising trust he already felt in Sophia's capabilities. Now, 2 weeks later, not only had the Anderson contract been secured with a 3-year renewal, longer than their previous terms, but word had spread through industry channels about Mitchell Enterprises' innovative new direction. 2 former clients had reached out to explore resuming their relationships, and the company's stock had seen its first significant uptick in over a year. The board, while still cautious, had expressed cautious optimism during their weekly update call. Harold Winters had even used the phrase encouraging progress, which from him was tantamount to enthusiastic praise. All of this positive momentum could be traced directly to Sophia Carter, who had seamlessly integrated herself into the Mitchell Enterprises executive team with a quiet efficiency that impressed even the most skeptical observers. Robert had appointed her Chief Innovation Officer as promised, giving her authority to assemble a small but growing team focused on developing and implementing the digital transformation strategy across their service lines. On this particular evening, Robert found himself working late, reviewing the materials for an upcoming presentation to another major client who had expressed interest in their new integrated approach. The Mitchell Enterprises offices were largely empty, the Chicago skyline outside his window transformed into a glittering tapestry of lights against the night sky. A knock at his open door drew his attention. Sophia stood there, tablet in hand, looking as composed at 9 p.m. as she had at their 7 a.m. meeting. "I thought you might want to see the latest analytics from the Anderson implementation," she said. "The initial results are exceeding projections." Robert gestured for her to enter. "Show me." She sat across from him, swiping through a series of dashboards that displayed various performance metrics. "We've identified 12.3 million in additional cost savings opportunities that the traditional analysis missed. More importantly, the predictive modeling suggests their new product line will achieve profitability 3 quarters earlier than originally forecast if they implement these optimizations." Robert studied the data, impressed despite himself. In just 2 weeks, her team had delivered insights that would have taken his traditional analysts months to compile, if they'd found them at all. "This is good work," he acknowledged, leaning back in his chair. "Very good work." "Thank you." She set the tablet aside. "There's something else I wanted to discuss, if you have a moment." Something in her tone caught his attention. "Go ahead." "I've been reviewing the company's historical performance data as part of my onboarding process," she began. "I noticed a pattern in the decline that began about 3 years ago. It wasn't just the Asian expansion failure or the increased competition. There was a more fundamental shift happening." Robert's expression tightened slightly. "And what shift was that?" "Mitchell Enterprises built its reputation on saving companies in crisis, coming in when things were already broken and fixing them," Sophia explained. "That model worked brilliantly for decades, but the market has evolved. Companies today don't want to wait until they're in crisis. They want partners who can help them prevent crises through continuous transformation." It was an astute observation, one that articulated a truth Robert had sensed but never fully acknowledged. "And you believe your digital integration strategy addresses this shift?" "It's a start," she said, "but I think we need to go further. Instead of positioning ourselves as the experts who come in to fix problems, we should reposition as the partners who help prevent them in the first place. Continuous optimization rather than crisis intervention." Robert studied her thoughtfully. In the 2 weeks since she'd joined Mitchell Enterprises, Sophia had demonstrated not just technical expertise, but a strategic vision that seemed well beyond her years. The question that had nagged at him since their first meeting resurfaced with new intensity. "How old are you, Miss Carter?" he asked abruptly. If she was surprised by the question, she didn't show it. 22. The answer confirmed his suspicion. "That would make you remarkably young to have founded your own consulting firm, let alone develop the expertise you've demonstrated here." She met his gaze steadily. "I graduated high school at 16, completed my undergraduate degree in 3 years, and earned my MBA by 21. I've been working in digital transformation consulting since I was an undergraduate." "Impressive credentials," Robert acknowledged, "but they don't fully explain your particular interest in Mitchell Enterprises. Of all the struggling legacy firms you could have approached with your innovative ideas, why us?" A moment of silence stretched between them. Something shifted in Sophia's expression, a barely perceptible change that suggested she was making a decision. "Do you remember a girl who came into your building one winter morning about 10 years ago?" she asked quietly. "She was hungry. You took her to the executive dining room and ordered her a full breakfast." Robert stared at her, momentarily uncomprehending. Then, like a photograph slowly developing, the memory surfaced. A small, shivering figure at the security desk, eyes too dignified for her circumstances, the unusual impulse he'd felt to help her personally rather than delegate the situation to someone else. "That was you," he said, not a question but a realization. "Sophia?" "Carter." She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "I was 12. My mother had lost her job after getting sick and we'd been evicted from our apartment. We were staying in shelters, but that morning the one we'd been at had reached capacity, and we had to leave early. Mom had gone to stand in line at a temporary employment agency. I was supposed to go to the library until school started, but I was so hungry I could barely think straight." Robert remembered now, her careful dignity as she ate, her mention of the library, the surprising articulation for someone so young and in such difficult circumstances. "I gave you my card," he recalled. "You never called." "We got back on our feet eventually," Sophia said. "My mom found steady work, we got a small apartment. Things stabilized, but I never forgot what you did that day." Robert shook his head slightly. "It was just breakfast." "It wasn't just breakfast," Sophia corrected him gently. "It was being treated with dignity when I felt invisible. It was sitting in that beautiful dining room and realizing that there was a world beyond our struggle, a world I might be able to reach someday, if I worked hard enough." She reached into her pocket and removed something, a worn, creased business card. His business card, the edges softened with age, the once crisp lettering faded from being handled over the years. "I kept this," she said, placing it on the desk between them. "It was a reminder of a goal. I promised myself that someday I'd be in a position to sit across a table from you as an equal." Robert picked up the card, turning it over in his fingers, a strange emotion tightening his chest. "You achieved that goal and then some, but it doesn't explain why you came to Mitchell Enterprises now at our lowest point." Sophia hesitated, then reached into her pocket again and extracted a small, folded piece of paper that appeared even more worn than the business card. She unfolded it carefully and placed it beside the card. "I left this with your assistant that day. She must not have given it to you." Robert picked up the paper, a library checkout slip with childish handwriting on the back. "Thank you. Someday, I'll come back to help." The simple message, written by a hungry child a decade earlier, hit Robert with unexpected force. He looked up at Sophia, seeing her now with new clarity, not just as the brilliant young innovator who had appeared at precisely the right moment to save his company, but as the living embodiment of a connection he'd all but forgotten, a small kindness returned tenfold. "You knew the company was in trouble," he said slowly. "You've been tracking us." She nodded. "I followed your career through business school. Mitchell Enterprises was always my case study of choice whenever we had to analyze a company. I watched the expansion into Asia, saw the warning signs when digital competitors started gaining ground. When I heard about James Harrington leaving and the Anderson contract being at risk, I knew it was time." "Time for what?" "Time to fulfill my promise," she said simply. "Time to help the man who helped me when no one else would." The revelations settled between them, reshaping everything Robert thought he knew about the past few weeks. What he had interpreted as fortunate timing or perhaps opportunistic career building was in fact something far more personal, a debt being repaid, a circle being completed. "Why didn't you tell me who you were when we first met?" he asked. "Would you have taken my proposal seriously if I had?" she countered. "Or would you have seen it as some kind of sentimental gesture, a distraction from the real business at hand?" She was right, of course. The Robert Mitchell of 2 weeks ago would have dismissed any proposal tinged with personal history or emotional connection. Business wasn't personal. That had been his mantra for decades. Except sometimes, apparently, it was. The weeks following. Sophia's revelation brought changes to Mitchell Enterprises that few could have predicted. The integration of her digital strategy wasn't merely a technical update to existing services. It represented a fundamental shift in how the company approached its core mission. Rather than swooping in to rescue failing businesses through aggressive cost-cutting and restructuring, they were now partnering with clients earlier in their life cycle, identifying potential issues before they became crises, and implementing continuous optimization processes that created sustainable value. For Robert, the transformation extended far beyond business strategy. The knowledge that Sophia, the hungry child he'd fed on impulse a decade ago, had returned specifically to help him in his hour of need, triggered a profound reassessment of principles he had long taken as gospel. The Mitchell method needs to evolve, he announced during an executive team meeting 6 weeks after Sophia had joined the company. Our future isn't in crisis management, it's in crisis prevention. The statement, coming from a man who had built his reputation and fortune on being the corporate equivalent of an emergency room surgeon, sent ripples of surprise through the boardroom. Patricia, who had been advocating for similar changes for years, couldn't hide her astonishment. "That's a significant shift in philosophy, Robert," she said carefully. "May I ask what prompted this reconsideration?" Robert glanced at Sophia, who sat quietly taking notes, her expression neutral. "Let's just say I've been given reason to reconsider the value of intervention versus prevention." The changes Robert and Sophia implemented weren't merely cosmetic. They restructured entire departments, invested heavily in digital talent, and reimagined client relationships from transactional engagements to ongoing partnerships. Traditional analysts were paired with data scientists. Project managers received training in agile methodologies. The corporate culture, long focused on efficiency and results at any cost, began to incorporate concepts like sustainability and human-centered design. Not everyone embraced the new direction. Several longtime executives, uncomfortable with the rapid pace of change, chose to leave. But for each departure, multiple new talents arrived, drawn by the buzz that Mitchell Enterprises was undergoing a renaissance under visionary new leadership. The Stanford Tech Incubator wants us to present our transformation case study at their annual symposium, Sophia reported one afternoon, 3 months into her tenure. And Harvard Business Review is requesting an interview about our digital reinvention. Robert smiled wryly. Quite a change from the business obituaries they were preparing to write about us not long ago. The Anderson contract had indeed proven to be the turning point Robert had hoped for. Not only had the implementation exceeded all performance metrics, but Richard Anderson had become their most vocal advocate, referring 3 other major clients to Mitchell Enterprises in as many months. The board, initially skeptical of such rapid changes, had been won over by the unmistakable results. At the 3-month review meeting, the deadline they had set for Robert to demonstrate meaningful improvement or step down, Harold Winters had actually begun the session with congratulations rather than criticism. "What you've accomplished in 90 days is remarkable," he acknowledged. "The stock price is up 22%, new client acquisition has doubled, and staff retention has stabilized. The question now isn't whether you should remain as CEO, but how we can support this continued transformation." For Robert, the professional validation was gratifying, but it was overshadowed by a more personal transformation taking place within him. Working closely with Sophia had forced him to confront aspects of his business philosophy and himself that he had avoided examining for decades. One evening, as they worked late finalizing a major presentation, Robert found himself sharing stories he'd rarely told anyone about his childhood in a struggling Detroit neighborhood, his father's job at the auto plant, the layoffs that had devastated their community when the factory closed. "That's why I built Mitchell Enterprises the way I did," he explained. "I saw how fragile everything was, how quickly it could all disappear. I wanted to create something unshakable, something that wouldn't be vulnerable to the whims of the market or the decisions of people who didn't care about the consequences." Sophia listened attentively, connecting dots that Robert himself had never fully articulated. So the Mitchell method, the focus on efficiency, cost-cutting, streamlining, It wasn't just about maximizing profit, it was about creating resilience. Exactly. Robert nodded, surprised and somehow comforted by her understanding. But somewhere along the way I lost sight of why I was doing it. The methods became ends in themselves, not means to a greater purpose. And what was that greater purpose? Sophia asked quietly. Robert considered the question, realizing he hadn't thought about it in decades. To create stability, to build systems that wouldn't collapse and leave people stranded like my father was. That's still a worthy purpose, she observed. It just needs modern methods to achieve it. These conversations became a regular occurrence, extending beyond strategy sessions into deeper territories: philosophy, ethics, the responsibilities of business in society. For perhaps the first time since his early career, Robert found himself engaging with the why of business, not just the how. The changes weren't limited to the office. Robert began reconnecting with his children, making deliberate efforts to bridge the emotional distance that had grown between them over the years. He invited Thomas to visit from Seattle, spending a weekend showing him the company's new direction, and more importantly, listening to his son's life and aspirations in a way he never had before. "You seem different, Dad," Thomas observed as they walked along Chicago's lakeshore one Sunday morning. "More present." Robert considered this. "I've been reminded recently that the most valuable investments we make aren't always the ones that show up on balance sheets." Elizabeth came next, her initial wariness gradually softening as she witnessed her father's genuine attempts to engage. During her visit, she joined Robert and Sophia for dinner at a small neighborhood restaurant, a far cry from the exclusive establishments he had once preferred. "So you're the one responsible for this transformation," Elizabeth said to Sophia, a hint of wonder in her voice. "I've been trying to get through to him for years." "I just offered a different perspective," Sophia replied modestly. "Your father made his own choices." "Well, whatever you did, thank you," Elizabeth said sincerely. "I've never seen him this human." Robert had pretended to be offended, but the truth in his daughter's words resonated deeply. He had spent decades building walls, around his company, around his emotions, around his relationships, all in service to a vision of strength and stability that had ultimately proven hollow. 6 months after Sophia had walked into his office, with her proposal, Mitchell Enterprises had not only recovered, but was thriving in ways that defied all expectations. The stock price had surpassed its previous peak, client satisfaction metrics were at all-time highs, and industry publications that had once predicted their demise were now hailing them as pioneers of a new approach to business transformation. But, for Robert, the most significant change wasn't reflected in any financial statement or market analysis. It was in the renewed sense of purpose he felt each morning, the connections he was rebuilding with his children, and the unexpected relationship he had developed with Sophia. "I've been thinking," he said one afternoon as they reviewed the quarterly results in his office, "about succession planning." Sophia looked up from her tablet. "That's wise. Every company should have a clear succession strategy." "I'm not talking about someday," Robert clarified. "I'm talking about beginning the transition now." Her expression shifted to surprise. "You're planning to retire? The company is just hitting its stride under your leadership." Robert shook his head. "Not retire, evolve. Move into a chairman role focused on strategic vision and client relationships, while transitioning day-to-day operations to someone who truly understands where business is heading in the digital age." Understanding dawned in Sophia's eyes. "You're talking about me." "The board has already approved the plan pending your acceptance," Robert confirmed. "They've seen what you've accomplished in 6 months. They believe in your vision, as do—" Sophia set her tablet down, taking a moment to process the proposal. "I'm honored by your confidence, but this is unexpected. I'm 22, Robert. There will be significant skepticism about my readiness for such a role." "There will," he acknowledged, "and you'll prove the skeptics wrong, just as you've been doing your entire life. From a hungry 12-year-old determined to stay in school, despite homelessness, to the youngest CEO of a major consulting firm in American business history. Your age isn't a liability, Sophia. It's your greatest asset. You see possibilities that people like me with decades of set patterns simply can't envision. She was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words. What about Phoenix Strategy? I built that company from nothing. Bring them in, Robert suggested. Make it a merger rather than an acquisition. Their team would accelerate our digital capabilities, and your founding partners could take leadership roles here. The practical solution addressed her immediate concern, but Robert could see she was grappling with something deeper. When I came here, she said finally, I had a clear goal, to help save the company of the man who once helped me. I never imagined becoming its leader. The best leaders rarely do, Robert replied. They're focused on solving problems, creating value, building something meaningful. Leadership finds them, not the other way around. Sophia stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline as she considered the proposal. Robert watched her, struck again by the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter on a snowy morning to a partnership that had transformed not just a company, but both their lives. I'll do it, she said, finally turning back to face him, but on one condition. Name it. We formalized the Mitchell Enterprises Foundation with a significant endowment, she said, focused specifically on supporting homeless families and educational opportunities for disadvantaged youth. Robert smiled, unsurprised by her condition. Already in progress, the board approved the initial funding last week, $50 million to start, with a commitment to contribute 5% of annual profits going forward. For the first time since he'd known her, Sophia appeared genuinely startled. You anticipated my request? Let's just say I've learned a valuable lesson about the returns that come from investing in people, Robert said. Sometimes a simple breakfast can change lives in ways we never could have imagined. 5 years had passed since the day Sophia Carter became CEO of Mitchell Enterprises. Chicago had evolved, as cities do, with new buildings rising against the skyline and old neighborhoods reinventing themselves. The company had evolved as well, growing beyond its original identity as a financial restructuring firm into a comprehensive business transformation partner that helped clients navigate the increasingly complex intersection of finance, technology, and human capital. On this particular winter morning, snow fell in heavy flakes outside the windows of what had once been Robert's corner office, but now belonged to Sophia. At 37, she had proven the skeptics wrong, guiding Mitchell Enterprises through a period of unprecedented growth and innovation. Under her leadership, the company had tripled in size, expanded into 17 countries, and built a reputation as a thought leader in sustainable business transformation. Robert, now 67, had settled comfortably into his role as chairman. He focused primarily on strategic relationships and mentorship, both within the company and through the Mitchell Enterprises Foundation, which had become one of the most impactful corporate foundations in the country, having helped thousands of families escape homelessness and supported educational initiatives for disadvantaged youth across America. The new Chicago Youth Center opens next month, Sophia said, reviewing the foundation's quarterly report with Robert in her office. The after-school program is already oversubscribed, and the family support services have a waiting list. Robert nodded, a quiet satisfaction in his expression. Do we have capacity to expand the program sooner than planned? I've already authorized the additional funding, Sophia replied. We're converting the unused warehouse space on the second floor into 10 more classrooms and a computer lab. Their working relationship had evolved into a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and complementary strengths. Robert's decades of experience balanced Sophia's innovative vision, creating a leadership dynamic that industry observers often cited as the secret to Mitchell Enterprises' continued success. There's something else I wanted to discuss, Sophia said, setting aside the foundation report. Something personal. Robert raised an eyebrow, intrigued. In the years they'd worked together, Sophia had maintained a certain professional distance regarding her private life, focusing their conversations primarily on business matters and broader, philosophical questions. I'm listening, he said. I've been thinking about my mother lately, she began, about everything she sacrificed to give me opportunities, even when we had nothing. She worked multiple jobs, went without meals so I could eat, never gave up trying to create stability for us. Robert nodded. He had met Sandra Carter at the ceremony marking Sophia's appointment as CEO, a dignified woman with the same quiet determination he recognized in her daughter. She never complained, Sophia continued. Not once. Even when we were in shelters, she would tell me, "This is temporary, Sophia. Your education is permanent. No one can ever take that away from you." She made sure I stayed in school, helped with my homework after working 12-hour shifts, celebrated every achievement as if it were a miracle. "She sounds remarkable," Robert said softly. "She is," Sophia agreed. "And next week is her 60th birthday. I want to do something special for her, something that honors not just what she did for me, but what she represents. The countless parents who sacrifice everything to give their children a chance at a better life." Robert leaned forward, instantly engaged. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to establish a scholarship program in her name," Sophia explained, her passion evident in her voice. "The Sandra Carter Second Chance Scholarship for parents who had to postpone or abandon their own education to support their families. Full tuition, childcare stipends, flexible scheduling, comprehensive support services." "That's a wonderful idea," Robert said sincerely. "The foundation could certainly fund it." "I'd like to fund it personally," Sophia clarified, "but I was hoping the foundation might administer it, leverage its infrastructure and expertise to identify the right candidates and provide the support they'll need to succeed." "Of course," Robert agreed immediately. "We'd be honored to help implement your vision." Sophia smiled, relief and gratitude in her expression. "Thank you. It means a lot to me." As they discussed the details of the scholarship program, Robert found himself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. The hungry 12-year-old girl had not only transformed herself through determination and intelligence, but had returned to transform his company, his foundation, and in many ways, Robert himself. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Jessica, who had remained as the executive assistant through the transition, entered with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone at reception asking to see Mr. Mitchell. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's very insistent." Robert exchanged a curious glance with Sophia. Most visitors these days came to see the CEO, not the chairman. "Did she give her name?" he asked. "Emily Winters," Jessica replied. "She says it's a personal matter." The name meant nothing to Robert. "Did she say what it's regarding?" Jessica hesitated. "She just said to tell you she needs help. She appears to be quite young, sir. Maybe 16 or 17. Something in the description triggered a sense of déjà vu for both Robert and Sophia. They exchanged a knowing look. "Send her up," Sophia said before Robert could respond. When Jessica left, Robert turned to Sophia with a questioning expression. "You seem to have made that decision for me." "Call it intuition," she replied with a small smile. "Or perhaps pattern recognition." The young woman who entered Sophia's office minutes later was indeed young, not quite 18, Robert guessed. She wore a worn jacket too light for the winter weather, and though she carried herself with dignity, there was a wariness in her eyes that spoke of difficult circumstances. "Mr. Mitchell?" she asked, looking between the two of them uncertainly. "I'm Robert Mitchell," he confirmed, standing to greet her. "And this is Sophia Carter, our CEO. What can we do for you, Emily?" The girl seemed surprised to find herself in the CEO's office, but quickly gathered her composure. "I'm sorry to come without an appointment. I know people like you must be very busy." "We always have time to meet new people," Sophia assured her, gesturing toward the comfortable seating area by the window. "Please have a seat. Would you like some coffee, tea, perhaps something to eat?" Emily hesitated, then admitted, "I haven't had breakfast yet, but I didn't come here for food." "Nevertheless, breakfast is important," Sophia said, pressing the intercom. "Jessica, could you please have the kitchen send up a full breakfast? The works, eggs, bacon, pancakes, fruit, hot chocolate." The specific order, identical to what Robert had ordered for Sophia all those years ago, was not lost on him. He watched as Sophia deftly made their young visitor comfortable, asking general questions about her interests and background, without prying into whatever circumstances had brought her to Mitchell Enterprises on this snowy morning. As Emily ate, her initial nervousness gradually faded. Between bites of pancake, her story emerged, a familiar tale of family hardship, a parent's illness, financial struggles, and a bright young mind determined not to let circumstances derail her future. "My mom found your foundation's website," she explained finally. "She saw the college scholarship program, but the application deadline was last month. I know it's asking a lot, but I was hoping there might be a way to still be considered. My SAT scores just came in and they're good, really good. I could show you." Robert glanced at Sophia, seeing in her expression the same recognition he felt, the unmistakable echo of a moment from the past, replaying itself with new characters, but the same essential human story. "Emily," Sophia said gently, "what if I told you we're actually launching a new scholarship program, one that might be even better suited to your family's situation?" The hope that blossomed on the girl's face was answer enough. Later, after they had connected Emily with the Foundation's education director and assured her that her application would receive full consideration, Robert and Sophia stood together at the window, watching the snow continue to fall over Chicago. "Full circle," Robert murmured, more to himself than to Sophia. "What was that?" she asked. "Life has a way of bringing things full circle," he elaborated. "Moments repeat themselves, giving us chances to recognize patterns, to see the larger design." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't walked into this building that day? If you had been in a different mood, or if security had turned me away before you saw me?" "I used to believe business success was all about strategy and execution," Robert replied. "Careful planning and ruthless implementation, but more and more I think the most important moments are the unplanned ones, the small decisions we make when there's no clear benefit, when we act from something deeper than calculated self-interest. Like feeding a hungry child," Sophia said softly. "Or returning to help someone who once helped you," Robert added. "Those moments reveal who we truly are and shape who we become." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the city below, each reflecting on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this shared present. "I received an interesting offer last week," Robert said finally. "Harvard Business School wants me to teach a course on business ethics and sustainable leadership." Sophia turned to him, surprised and pleased. "You'd be wonderful at that. Are you considering it?" "I am," he admitted, "though it would mean spending more time in Boston, reducing my role here even further." "You've built something that can thrive without your daily presence," Sophia reminded him. "That's the mark of a truly successful leader." Robert nodded, acknowledging the truth, in her words. "There's something appealing about the idea of sharing what I've learned, especially the lessons that came later in my career, the ones about the true purpose of business and wealth." "The students would be fortunate to learn from your experience," Sophia said sincerely. "Both your successes and your—" She paused, searching for the right word. "My failures?" Robert suggested with a wry smile. "Your evolution," Sophia corrected. The story of how Robert Mitchell, the feared corporate restructuring expert, discovered that the most valuable asset in any business is its humanity. Robert chuckled. "When you put it that way, it does sound like a course worth teaching." As they returned to Sophia's desk to conclude their meeting, Robert found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that a simple act of kindness had set in motion. A hungry child fed, a note of gratitude, forgotten and then rediscovered, a company saved, lives transformed, and now a new generation of young people being given opportunities they might otherwise never have had. "You know," he said as he gathered his papers, "for decades I measured success by the bottom line, profit margins, market share, stock price. It's taken me most of my life to understand that the most important returns can't be calculated on a spreadsheet." "What would you say they are?" Sophia asked, genuinely interested in his perspective. Robert thought for a moment, then answered, with the hard-won wisdom of his journey: "The lives we touch, the potential we help unlock, The moments when we choose compassion over calculation, those are the investments that yield returns beyond measure. As he walked through the corridors of the company he had built, nodding to employees who greeted him with genuine respect rather than the fearful deference of years past, Robert Mitchell felt a deep contentment. The empire he had created had not only survived, but had been transformed into something far more meaningful than he had ever envisioned. Not just a successful business, but a force for positive change in countless lives. And it had all begun with breakfast for a hungry child on a snowy Chicago morning.